Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Feast of St. Joseph the Workman on this first Friday. As you may have seen in the updates, we will be resuming confessions tomorrow, the usual time on Saturday, beginning at 4 o'clock. Right now we only have two priests, including myself. They'll be here in confession, Father Vanderween and I. We're hoping to get at least one more, if not two more. But obviously we haven't had confession in the parish over a week. So we're expecting a lot of you to be coming, which is wonderful. You should be feel free to come to receive the sacrament penance. We always encourage that, even if it's only been a short time. But I will implore you to realize that, especially that there are probably going to be a lot of people, and to be very mindful of that, very mindful of the fact that to keep your confessions as brief as possible. And I say that especially to those who are making devotional confessions, that is, have no mortal sins to confess. So you should make devotional confessions frequently, even every month, every couple of weeks or so. That's great. But when you come for a devotional confession under these conditions, it's especially incumbent upon you to keep your confession very brief, because anytime you go to confession, if you have mortal sins, you always have to confess them by name and number. If you don't have mortal sins, if you're doing a devotional confession, just venial sins, you only have to confess one venial sin. The key part for confession, always contrition, not the number of sins. St. Francis of Sales talks about the danger of rattling off a long list of venial sins which we are not truly resolved to overcome. Much better for a devotional confession, confess one or two sins that you're sorry for, have a firm purpose of amendment, and you will have a much more fruitful confession than rattling off 10 sins, telling stories, and doing all these other things that sometimes are a great distraction to making a good confession. So for those who are coming to make a devotional confession, you're most welcome, but be very mindful of keeping your confession short. The worst thing that can happen is that you make a long devotional confession, and some people back on the car line leaves who has mortal sins, and who knows if they're going to die in their mortal sins because of any pridefulness or selfishness of making a long confession during this time. Obviously, if it's been a long time since you're coming to confession, you have mortal sins, then I'm not really talking to you, although even with mortal sins, there's really no reason to spend more than a few minutes with your confession. So this is just a message because I want everyone who wants to receive confession tomorrow, and this is going days after this, of course, but especially tomorrow on Saturday, since it's the first time in over a week that we've had confessions. I want everyone to be able to receive the sacrament, but I also implore those who are making devotional confessions to make a very serious effort to keep your confessions very short. And I'll give you a very brief example of what a short confession, good confession will be. After you said your how long since your last confession, you could say, for example, I was impatient with my spouse, and I was uncharitable in my speech. For these and all my sins, I'm truly sorry, especially all my past sins against charity or chastity or whatever. That's a good confession, so long as you're sorry for those sins. And it's much better than rattling off another 10 sins or going into details about those sins. The focus should always on confession, should always be contrition. We always have to be sorry for our sins to be forgiven. And again, for those who have mortal sins, of course, to focus just on the mortal sins. Don't waste any time on venial sins unless they directly contributed to the mortal sins, and always confess them by name and number. So I hope everyone who wants to come to confession tomorrow and really feels a desire and a need for the sacrament to come tomorrow, and of course hopefully we'll be having regular confessions going forward. But please, I implore you to make every effort to be very brief and concise in your confession, as out of love for your neighbor who might be waiting 20 cars down outside and who really wants, or in some cases really needs, the sacrament of penance. God bless you, and have a wonderful feast of St. Joseph.